All I wanted was a warm meal and a moment out of the wind, but the second I stepped inside, the air turned colder than the streets outside. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Eyes flicked toward meth and quickly away, like I was something that didn't belong. I took a seat at the far end of the counter, back to the wall, facing the exits. Old habit. Survival never really leaves you. From the corner booth, I heard the familiar tone of judgment. "What's he doing here?" said one of the officers wryly, I'd later learn. Mason smirked beside him, probably here for scraps. They looked at me like a problem. I barely had time to wrap my hands around the mug of coffee before the sneering started. Officer Riley leaned back in his booth, voice raised just enough for the whole diner to hear. "Bet that coat's seen more dumpsters than deployments." Mason chuckled, loud and unkind. "You sure this guy's even a vet? Probably picked up those dog tags at a pawn shop." Their words bounced off the chrome and tile like bullets, sharp, careless, meant to cut. I didn't flinch, just sipped my coffee and kept my eyes on the steam rising from the cup. What they didn't understand was, I'd faced fire in places they couldn't pronounce. I'd pulled men from burning vehicles, buried friends with my own hands, and stood alone against things far worse than their contempt. But that didn't make this easy. I felt every gaze in the diner settle on me again, some amused, some nervous, none brave. I wasn't Jeremiah Boone, former Marine. I was just that guy. The one they joked about, the one they feared quietly, the one they hoped would leave soon. From behind the counter, the young waitress Lisa Monroe, her name tag read stood frozen. Her hand hovered over the coffee pot, but her eyes were on me. She'd seen it all, heard it all. And for the first time, she didn't laugh. She didn't look away. Her brow creased, not with pity, but with something deeper, something questioning. She walked over slowly, refilled my cup with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so low only I could hear. I didn't answer right away, just nodded. Because in a place like this, sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. They mocked the uniform without ever wearing one, but I carried mine, stitched into my skin, quiet, steady, and unshakable. I had just cut into the meatloaf when Officer Riley stood from his booth and strolled over like he owned the place. "All right, time's up," he said, voice louder than necessary. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." I looked up slowly. "Excuse me?" "You're disturbing customers," he continued, smirking. "We've had reports of loitering and suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior? A man eating a meal he paid for." I kept my voice level. "I haven't broken any laws, officer." Mason joined him, towering beside my stool. "That so?" he said, eyes narrowing. "Because it looks to me like you're making folks uncomfortable. That's enough reason to move along." Across the diner, no one said a word. No one moved. A woman stared at her coffee like it might save her. An old man pulled out his wallet and tucked it deeper into his jacket. Even the cook behind the counter had vanished into the back. Only Lisa remained, frozen in place behind the counter, coffee pot in hand. "I'm not going anywhere," I said simply. "I've paid for my meal, and I intend to finish it." Riley's smirk faded. He reached for my arm. "On your feet, now." "Sir," Lisa began, voice trembling. "He's not causing trouble. He hasn't raised his voice, hasn't." Riley turned to her, eyes flashing. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," I said. Mason grabbed my other arm. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and refusing to comply." I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I let them twist my arms behind me and slap on the cuffs like I was a threat, like I hadn't been trained to disarm men twice their size with one hand. "Careful," Riley said mockingly. "Don't want our hero getting hurt." The cold metal bit into my wrists as they turned me toward the door. I glanced at Lisa one last time. She stood there, trembling, wide-eyed, the pot still in her hand. And that's when I said it. "If I don't come back," I told her, voice calm and deliberate, "call Lieutenant General Abraham Keller. Tell him Jeremiah Boone is in trouble. He owes me his life." Everything in the diner froze. Even Mason paused mid-step. Riley chuckled, but it was uneasy now. Keller, huh? And I suppose you're dining with the Secretary of Defense next week. They dragged me through the door and into the swirling snow. I didn't fight, didn't look back. But Lisa did. She ran to the window and watched the patrol car pull away. Then she turned to the counter, where something glinted in the melted snow I'd tracked in. My dog tags, they must have slipped from around my neck. She bent down, picked them up with shaking fingers, and traced the embossed letters. Boone, Jeremiah, USMC, blood type O, no religion. She didn't understand what she'd just witnessed, not fully, but she understood this wasn't right. Not tonight, not this man. She glanced at the door, then at the tags, then at her phone. And for the first time in her life, Lisa Monroe didn't wait for someone else to do the right thing. She pressed record. In a quiet office in Arlington, Virginia, lit only by a banker's lamp and the soft blue glow of 2 security monitors, Lieutenant General Abraham Keller sat perfectly still. The man who had once commanded thousands now reviewed field reports from overseas, his days filled with policy briefings and senatorial phone calls. But tonight, his world narrowed to one name: Jeremiah Boone. It had been decades, but some names don't fade. Some debts can't be repaid with medals or mentions in history books. When the call came in from a waitress in a small-town diner with a shaking voice and a name he hadn't heard since Kandahar, he didn't hesitate. Keller stood immediately. Patch me through to Internal Affairs, Department of Defense, Priority 1. Within 5 minutes, he was on 3 lines: Pentagon, Department of Justice, and an old friend at Homeland Security. His voice, calm and clipped, carried weight most men couldn't fake. There's been an unlawful detainment of a decorated Marine, Granite Hollow, Pennsylvania. I want a direct contact at that department now. And loop in Defense Media Operations. I want eyes on this by morning. As his aides scrambled, Keller turned to a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, battered photo. It showed a younger version of himself, caked in dust, leaning against a Humvee with his arm around a darker-skinned man, both grinning despite the smoke rising behind them. Boone had pulled him from the wreckage with one arm shattered and enemy fire raining down, carried him over half a mile to extraction, all while refusing pain meds until every last man in the squad was accounted for. No man left behind, Boone had said then. Now it was Keller's turn. Back in Granite Hollow, the police station buzzed with routine noise booking, paperwork, radio chatter until the sheriff's phone rang. He picked up, expecting a late-night complaint. This is Major Collins, Department of Defense. You are currently holding a decorated Marine, Sergeant Jeremiah Boone. He is to be released immediately. No charges, no record. We have a team en route. The sheriff sat bolt upright. Excuse me? You heard me, Sheriff. This isn't a request, and I suggest you inform Officers Riley and Mason to remain on station. Do not let them leave. This situation is now under federal oversight. By the time the line went dead, the sheriff's face was pale. He rose slowly, walked into the holding area, and stood outside the cell where Boone sat on a concrete bench, his eyes closed, back straight. Boone, he said, voice quieter now, you're free to go. Boone opened his eyes, calm as ever. Didn't think I'd be staying long. It was just after 3 a.m. when Jeremiah stepped out of the station. The cold hit him like an old friend. He didn't shiver. He barely got 2 steps before headlights swept across the parking lot. A sleek black SUV with government plates rolled to a stop. A woman stepped out. Black coat, military posture. She nodded once. Mr. Boone. I'm Agent Delaney, Internal Affairs, DOD. General Keller sends his regards. Jeremiah blinked against the brightness of the spotlight. He still moves fast when it counts. He never forgot Kandahar, she said. Another agent handed him his dog tags, freshly polished. We're going to need a statement, but for now, you're a free man. Boone turned to look back at the station windows. Riley stood behind the blinds, face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. Mason sat hunched on a bench, head in his hands. I'm not interested in revenge, Boone said, slipping the tags around his neck. No, Agent Delaney replied, but the law is. The next morning, Granite Hollow buzzed with rumors. A government vehicle at the police station, 2 officers suspended without explanation, the sheriff refusing all interviews. And Jeremiah Boone, the quiet man no one wanted in their diner, walking freely through town like nothing had happened except everything had. Lisa stood behind the counter at Blue Lantern, phone buzzing in her pocket with texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Her video, just 90 seconds long, was already being shared on veteran forums and picked up by a local reporter. She hadn't slept, but she didn't regret a thing. Jeremiah entered the diner just before sunrise. The regulars looked up, surprised. No one spoke. Lisa walked over. "Coffee?" He nodded. "Black." As she poured it, she whispered, "General Keller, he really did owe you his life, didn't he?" Jeremiah gave her a tired smile. "That's what he says." She hesitated. "What happens now?" He looked around the diner, at the people avoiding his eyes, at the seat where Riley had smirked, where Mason had laughed. "Now," he said quietly, "now they learn who I am." The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't. That morning, as the town of Granite Hollow thawed under a pale winter sun, the local paper ran a front-page headline that no one expected. Federal intervention frees local man in mysterious overnight operation. Most folks skimmed it, some speculated, a few dismissed it entirely, but by mid-morning, the real story was spreading through phones, forwarded texts, and whispered conversations. Jeremiah Boone wasn't just some homeless veteran. He was the Sergeant Boone recipient of the Silver Star, 2-time Purple Heart, former squad leader of Operation Dagger Dust, the classified mission buried under layers of Pentagon silence. And most importantly, he was the man who had saved Lieutenant General Abraham Keller's life in the middle of a siege in Afghanistan. It didn't come from Jeremiah. He never told Anion Ninot, the reporters, not the curious townsfolk, not even Lisa. But it came. First from Keller himself. During a press statement on Capitol Hill, when asked about the unusual federal presence in a small Pennsylvania town, he looked the reporter square in the eye and said, "The man you're referring to, Sergeant Jeremiah Boonians, carried me out of a burning convoy under enemy fire. He saved 3 more after that. That's not a rumor. That's not a story. That's history. You may not have known his name yesterday, but you will now." Later that evening, back in Granite Hollow, Jeremiah sat alone at the edge of Veterans Park, where an old concrete monument listed names from 3 wars and no more room to carve another. He didn't need his name on stone. He'd carried names far heavier than that. The breeze rolled soft through the pine trees, stirring the flag above the monument. He rested his boots on gravel, jacket zipped high, gaze on the horizon like a man still waiting for orders that might never come. Lisa found him there, coat half-zipped, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She handed him one without a word. He took it without thanks. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was earned. "They're saying you saved a general," she said finally, staring at the flag. "I did what any Marine would have done," Jeremiah replied. "But they didn't," she said softly. He took a sip. "That's why I remember their names." Lisa hesitated, then sat beside him on the cold bench. "You never said anything." He shrugged. "Why would I? Because maybe, if people knew, they'd treat me better." He turned to her now, not angry, but steady. "Lisa, the measure of a man isn't in what people know about him. It's in what he does when no one's watching." She swallowed hard. But they were watching, Riley, Mason, everyone in that diner, and they saw what they wanted to see, he said. An old man, a ragged coat, a burden. She looked down at her gloved hands. "You deserve better." Jeremiah looked back at the flag. "I had better. Once." At the police department, the mood was different. Officer Mason sat in a back office, shirt untucked, eyes bloodshot. The suspension order had come down swift and clear. Riley hadn't shown up at all. Inside the chief's office, a laptop played Keller's statement on loop. The sheriff stood behind his desk, arms crossed, listening again to the words, "That's history. You may not have known his name yesterday, but you will now." He shook his head and muttered, "My God. They had cuffed a national hero." They dragged him out like a criminal while half the town sipped coffee and looked the other way. And now, they were the ones being watched. That night, Lisa posted something on her social media. It was just a picture: Jeremiah sitting on the park bench, coffee in hand, flag waving above him. The caption was simple: "The uniform may fade, but some men never stop serving." Within hours, it went viral. Veteran groups reposted it. Journalists picked it up. Even the Department of Veterans Affairs shared it with the note, "Honor lives quietly among us." Suddenly, Jeremiah Boone wasn't invisible anymore. But none of that changed him. He didn't smile more, didn't stand taller, didn't even talk much more than usual. He still kept to the edges of the town, still checked alleyways for younger vets in trouble, still handed off spare gloves and quiet advice. The truth was, he'd never needed the world to know his story. He just needed it to stop hurting the ones no one else saw. Back at the diner, under new management after the owner's quiet resignation, the seat Jeremiah once sat in was left intentionally vacant. A small plaque was nailed to the wall above it, hand-carved, simple. It read, "Reserved for dignity, because some heroes don't ask for thanks." Lisa saw to it herself. And whenever someone asked why the stool stayed empty, she only smiled and said, "Because some uniforms you don't take off. You just carry them differently." The video was only 93 seconds long. Grainy at first, a bit shaky, but the audio clear as a rifle crack captured every word: Riley's sneer, Mason's taunts, the click of handcuffs, and then Jeremiah Boone's voice. "If I don't come back, call Lieutenant General Abraham Keller. He owes me his life." Lisa didn't expect it to go anywhere. She posted it late one night, exhausted, unsure, heart still pounding. She added no commentary, just the truth as it unfolded, raw and unedited. By dawn, it had over 200,000 views. By noon, it was national news. And by the time Granite Hollow's sleepy streets lit their porch lights that evening, every house with a television, tablet, or phone knew exactly who Jeremiah Boone was and what had been done to him. Public outrage came like a flood. Veterans organizations released statements demanding accountability. Former service members from every branch reposted the video with words like disgrace, shame, and enough. Families with sons and daughters in uniform asked how a Marine like Boone could be treated worse than a stray dog in the town he once protected. The Department of Defense issued a rare follow-up statement confirming Boone's service record: 3 tours in the Middle East, a Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and a commendation for valor under fire. The incident in Kandahar, one Keller spoke, oft been redacted for years due to operational secrecy. Now, it was national memory. At the Granite Hollow Police Department, the walls closed in fast. Officer Riley was placed on immediate administrative leave. Mason followed hours later. Both had their service weapons confiscated pending investigation. Their defense was textbook: misunderstanding, stress, context missing. But no one was buying it. Especially not after a second video surfaced recorded by a teenager in the back booth of the diner showing Riley deliberately stepping on Boone's dog tags as he was shoved out the door. The image of those tags, half buried in slush, echoed across headlines and hearts. A symbol of all the country claimed to honor dishonored in one lazy stomp. The sheriff tried to contain the fire. He issued a public statement filled with awkward pauses and poorly chosen words. "These actions do not reflect the values of our department, and we remain committed to accountability." But by then, it was too late. Community meetings turned into protests. Church groups, high school teachers, even local business owners, people who usually stayed quiet, began demanding answers, demanding change. Signs went up outside shops. "We stand with Boone. Respect has no rank. Homeless and worthless." And when an older veteran named Carl Dawson stood on the courthouse steps and pulled open his shirt to reveal his own military tattoos, then shouted, "He served with honor and they treated him like trash," a movement was born. Lisa kept her head down through it all. She never claimed credit, but reporters kept calling. Her inbox flooded, and when Good Morning America asked for an interview, she finally agreed with one condition: "We don't talk about me, we talk about him." Her segment aired 2 days later. By the end of it, donations had poured in to veteran housing nonprofits, and the governor's office announced emergency funding for homeless support statewide. Meanwhile, C-SPAN broadcasted a live hearing requested by the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. General Keller sat at the center, hands folded, eyes steely. His opening statement was brief. "When a soldier comes home, they should not have to fight for dignity. Sergeant Boone carried me through war. I will carry his story through peace." The room fell silent. No one interrupted. Back in Granite Hollow, the sheriff quietly submitted his resignation. There was no press release, no farewell. He simply cleared out his desk, packed up a box, and left the building before sunrise. The town clerk found his badge on the front desk with a note: "Do better than I did." As for Jeremiah, he stayed mostly quiet through the storm. Reporters tried to reach him, he declined. Veterans came to shake his hand. He nodded politely, offered them coffee, and asked how they were sleeping. When Lisa found him again at the edge of the park, she asked him what he thought of all the noise. He sipped from his thermos and answered plainly: "They mocked me for not mattering. Now the world's watching. Funny how truth works." She sat beside him, unsure whether to smile or cry. That night, at a special town meeting held inside the high school gym, a motion passed unanimously. Granite Hollow would rename Veterans Plaza to Boone Square. No speeches were given, no fanfare. But when the curtain dropped on the new sign, and the townspeople rose to their feet in a quiet standing ovation, Jeremiah didn't look for praise. He just stood there, hat in hand, eyes downcast, like a man still carrying the weight of a uniform he never stopped wearing. Justice had arrived. Not loud, not vengeful, but precise, unmistakable, and long, long overdue. 1 year later, Granite Hollow had changed. The snow still fell in thick, quiet layers. The streets still sloped the same, and the town's rhythm still moved slow. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted, like a town that had finally seen itself in a mirror and chosen to change what it saw. At the heart of it stood a place that once served eggs and judgment in equal measure: the Blue Lantern Diner. Now under new ownership, the building had been renovated not just in tiles and paint, but in spirit. The windows no longer fogged with silence, the counter no longer held whispers of mockery. And at the far end, where a single stool remained untouched, something new had been added. A hand-carved wooden plaque hung above it, simple, stained oak, letters burned into its grain. Respect is not owed by appearance, it's earned by sacrifice. It didn't name Jeremiah Boone. It didn't have to. That morning, Jeremiah sat beneath that plaque with a cup of black coffee between his hands. He wore the same jacket worn at the seams, patched with quiet pride. His boots still bore the marks of hard miles. But his eyes had changed, softer at the edges, steadier in the center. Across the diner, people came and went. They nodded at him now. Some said, "Good morning." Others simply left the coffee paid for without saying a word. He never asked for any of it. But he accepted it the way a soldier accepts the sunrise, without ownership, only with understanding. Lisa stepped from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was longer now, tied back neatly, and her smile carried a quiet strength. She slid into the seat across from him, setting down a second mug. "They still stop by," she said. "Reporters, students, vets passing through, some just to see the stool." Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. "Can't imagine why." Lisa laughed softly. "You're a hard man to honor, you know that?" "I didn't ask for honor." "No," she said. "You asked for dinner, and changed a nation." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lisa nodded toward the plaque. "I had that made the week after the vote passed. Took 3 tries to get the wording right." He glanced up at it, eyes narrowing with memory. Then he whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear. "They mocked a soldier. Now the country remembers his name." Lisa blinked back tears and said nothing. Outside the window, A young boy in a puffy coat held the door for an older man with a cane. Across the street, the community center bore a new sign, Boone House, services for veterans and families. Inside, laughter echoed from a nearby booth where two teenagers showed an elderly woman how to use her phone. The diner was no longer a place of exclusion, it was part of the town's repair. Later that afternoon, Jeremiah stood to leave. Lisa followed him to the door. "You heading back to the center?" He shook his head. "Taking a walk, just thinking." "About?" He paused. Then he looked back at the plaque, then at her. "About how one hot meal turned into something bigger than any of us." Lisa smiled. "It always starts small, one act of cruelty, one act of kindness, one witness who refuses to look away." He nodded once, then stepped outside into the falling snow. The air was crisp, quiet. The town square now had murals, faces of veterans, children, community workers. Quotes etched in stone, names that had once been whispered were now engraved. And above them all, one phrase stood tallest: "Justice remembers those the world forgets." Jeremiah Boone walked slowly through the square, his breath fogging in the cold. At the center stood a statue, not of him, but of a nameless soldier, sitting at a counter, hand on a mug of coffee. At its base, a simple bronze plate that read, "One meal, one stand, one movement." He stood there a long time. And when a group of schoolchildren passed by on a tour, their teacher pointed toward the figure and said, "He didn't shout, he didn't fight, he just stayed seated and made history." Jeremiah turned away, the ghost of a smile on his lips. He didn't need to be remembered. But he was glad the message was. Because in the end, that's what he had fought for. Not recognition, but remembrance of what dignity truly means. And how it should never ever be up for debate.